Hello everyone, welcome back. Welcome to another demo video for HLIFX 002. In this case, another application, another lighting and control setup for 002. And this is for the Space Battleship Yamato, as seen in Star Blazers, both in animated and live action form. We decided to make this particular setup because we think, in terms of simple lighting, it's easy enough to do with FX002. So first and foremost, I just want to give you a basic overview of the board before I get into the demo portion. You see it sitting here in front of you. This is FX002, as you can see written right here. The board itself is about 1 inch tall by about 2/3 of an inch wide, give or take. All the components are on the top side of the board. You're actually looking at the underside of the board here, where all the labeling and whatnot is written. See HobbyLink International there, HLIFX 002. We have our 5 primary control pins labeled A through E. All 5 of these pins may or may not be used, depending on how you use the Yamato board specifically. And we have our 3 power pins here, VN, ground, and plus 5 volts. VN is your voltage input, that's your positive voltage input. Ground is your negative voltage input, or just your ground point of your circuit. Plus 5 volts is a constant 5 volt output. For the Yamato board, it's not actually used. It's just a placeholder for other designs, so you can ignore that pin and leave it alone. But those are all the pins that you'll find on 002. Like I said, A through E will be used, may or may not totally be used depending on how you use the board. A through C are the lighting channels, and D and E in this case are the control channels for the Yamato. We put all of our labeling on the underside of the boards to save space. It allows us to make the boards a little bit smaller because we don't have to squeeze components and lettering on the same side of the board. I also personally recommend that you run your wiring through from the top down through to the bottom here, and then solder on the underside of the board here, because it's just a little easier on the thermals of the board. It makes it less likely that you're going to damage a component with your soldering iron, and a few other reasons. And then whenever you're ready, you just take a little dollop of hot glue or some kind of thick adhesive, put it on the board, and stick the board wherever you want. We do recommend that you put your boards inside of your bases. That way, or at least somewhere in the model where you can easily get to it. That way, if something goes wrong, something needs to be fixed or replaced, you can do that without having to cut open or break open the board. On a final note, the board is tolerant for both 9 volt and 12 volt power. It'll work on either one. This particular board has been, or the FX002 in particular, has been tested quite a bit at 9 volt and 12 volt, and it works just fine. No reason why it shouldn't here as well. We do optimize the boards for 9 volts, but we do realize some folks like to run their circuits at 12 volts. As long as you don't go above 12 volts, that's the hard upper limit, and you don't go too far below 9 volts. I would say 8 volts, maybe 7.5 to 7, but you go any lower than that for sure, and the board may start behaving intermittently. It may start behaving unpredictably as well. So not too much below 9. Definitely not above 12. Somewhere between 9 and 12 is usually a good choice. And again, we at HLI recommend 9 volts. So anyway, that's just a basic overview of the board. I'm now going to set up the actual demo portion, show you the lighting effects for the Yamato. So I'll do that, and I'll be right back. And I've now set up the demo circuit here for the Yamato on my breadboard. I use this breadboard for all the prototyping, design, concept work for HLIFX and the boards. It just keeps it relatively easy that way. What I've specifically done is I've taken the 002 board, you see here in the background, and I have used temporary jumpers to connect it to the breadboard itself. And I have stand-ins for each of the effects LEDs and 2 control buttons, which are momentary push button switches. And I'm only using 1 LED per channel just to keep it simple so that you can focus more on what the effects look like than using a whole bunch of different LEDs and colors and things like that. This is just, again, to give you a sense of what you're getting when you buy one of these boards in terms of the effects. So this LED is connected to channel A, this one to channel B, and this one to channel C. This push button is connected to channel D, and this one to channel E. You can have multiple LEDs hooked up to channels A, B, and C, 12 in each channel, as long as they're connected in parallel and they're all resisted properly. You can use whatever size or color that you want, 3mm, 5mm, surface mount LEDs, LED tape, as long as you're under 12 or so segments. And the instructions will go into detail on how to do that. Your push button switches need to be the momentary push button type, normally open, push to close. And aside from that, a little bit of wiring, and again, some appropriate size resistors if you're not using pre-resistor LEDs, and of course a power source. In this case, I'm running the board off of a 9-volt DC power jack. So with that being said, what do these effects do? Channel A is an engine effect. Specifically, it's an engine flicker, sort of to replicate a thruster effect. So you can hook up as many LEDs to the back engines of the ship as you need for that. These 2 LEDs on channel B and C represent the Wavegun. Now, when we looked at references of the Yamato both across the animated and live action versions, obviously the Wavegun is presented differently in terms of the colors, the duration of the ramp, and the flash or the blast. As you can imagine, different incarnations of the ship, even across different eras in the show or shows, the effects are a bit different, right? It's open to a little bit of interpretation. So what we decided to do was to try to keep it a little bit more general and separate the ramp and the flash. Channel B, which is this LED, represents the ramp, and channel C represents the flash of the Wavegun effect. So you can choose whatever kinds of LEDs and color or colors that you want for the ramp, and then whatever kind of LEDs and color you want for the flash. In this case, I'm using red and white, but you could use blue and white, you could use red and blue, blue and green, however you want to choose to do it. In this case, like I said, I'm just using red and white. This push button will control the firing of the Wavegun. You press it and the Wavegun effect will fire. This push button on channel E, this is channel D, this is channel E. The push button on channel E will control a flare for the engines. When you see me press it here in a couple minutes, you'll see that the engine will go from flicker to being constant on, to indicate sort of a, not necessarily a burst, but more like an engine flare, like the engines are now, devoted to full output. So that's the idea. You're going to have engine flicker with an optional push button flare and a push button for the waveguide, which will give you a ramp and a flash on 2 separate channels. So go ahead and apply power to the board. I just have a basic power switch here to turn the board on and off for me. And you see, as soon as the board gets power, it starts to run, and we have our engine flicker. I think you can pretty easily see that on camera. A little bit of diffusion will help that show up a bit better as well. And of course, when you put up multiple LEDs around your engines, that'll also help enhance the effect. So again, the engine flare is optional. You don't have to use it. If you don't decide to, then the engine will just sit there and flicker for as long as the board has power. But let me demonstrate the Wavegun effect. So again, if I press the push button on channel D, 3, 2, 1. So we get a ramp up in red a flash or a burst in white, and then a ramp down in red. But again, it doesn't have to be red and white. It could be whatever two colors you want. Press that one more time. I have a little bit of a dicky switch here, so sometimes it registers as multiple presses. I need to get a new set of switches. These are getting old and kind of worn out. We decided to time this based off a couple different sources. One of my main inspirations was the lighting kit for the big 1/350 scale version of the Bandai Yamato, because I think that looked pretty good. It also matched up with the sound effects in the show pretty well. But we considered other sources as well when doing the timing. So one more time. Nice ramp all the way to maximum. Then our flash. And then finally our ramp back down to nothing. And that's the Wavegun. Pretty straightforward, I think. Not too dissimilar from our photon torpedo effect, except in this case we're breaking it up against two different channels, so that again you have better control over the exact colors that you want. And also obviously a lot longer to match what is better seen on the show, or shows plural. The other thing that you can do, I don't have the proper kind of LED to demonstrate at the moment, but you can use a bicolor LED if you really, really want. You know, a bicolor LED gives you two different colors in the same package. So you could use one color of a bicolor LED for your ramp and another color for your flash. So you could go out and buy a red-white, a red-blue, a red-green, blue-green, blue-yellow, you know, aquamarine, hot pink, you know, whatever two colors you want to use. You can use a bicolor LED. And you can even use multiple bicolor LEDs. Again, as long as you don't go above 12. There will be a special section in the instructions that talk about how to wire it up that way. It is going to be a bit more of an advanced thing because the wiring gets a little bit more complicated. The only thing I will tell you here and now is if you are thinking about trying to do that, you do need to use common anode bicolor LEDs. That is, the common pin being positive. A lot of folks buy common pin negative or common cathode. Those are wrong. You need to have common anode, common pin positive bicolor LEDs if you want to do it that way. That's the way the board is wired, or that's the way the board is set up to be wired. So that's the Wavegun. Let me now show you the engine flare. So again, the engine flare is controlled by this push button on channel E. So right now the engine is flickering, but if I push this button, you'll get a short delay. The LED will then fade quickly up to full brightness, full constant on, and then we'll cut back to the flicker. So let me do that for you. 3, 2, 1. And there you see the flare. Lasts for a few seconds, and then cuts back to the flicker. The idea of that pause after I push the button is that it gives you the time to push the button, then peek around to the back side of the ship and actually see the flare happen. The Wavegun effect is long enough to where, you know, there's plenty of time for you to push the button and look around and see the ramp and the flash. But for the flare, gave a little bit of a pause so you have a chance to poke your head around and take a look at it. So one more time. 3, 2, 1. And again, put more LEDs onto that channel, do a little bit of diffusion, and that's going to be a pretty decent looking effect. It's not really a very bright burst, it's more of just a flare. It's just an indication that, you know, the engines are no longer in sort of a corrective propulsion mode. It's now just, you know, open up and, you know, straight ahead kind of thing. So one more time, I'll give you the engine burst, and yes, you can fire both of these at the same time if you want. I'll do the burst, and then or the engine flare, and then show you the wavegun effect. So here we go. 3, 2, 1. Engine. And then wavegun. So yes, both can be done at the same time if you ever wanted to do that. So again, like I said, the flare on the engine is optional. You don't have to connect this push button to the board if you don't want to. If you don't want a flare, then this will just sit here and flicker for as long as the board has power. And that is the simple Space Battleship Yamato lighting from HLIFX 002. We think there's going to be some demand for this board. There's a few different versions of the Yamato out there. You've got the big 1/350 scale version if you're lucky enough to have it, or if you're extremely lucky and find one at a decent price somewhere, which at this point is probably impossible. You've also got the 1/500 scale, a little easier to get but still expensive, but there's also the 1/1000, I believe. I think there's also a 1500 and 2500, but I'm not entirely sure on recalling that properly. I could be wrong. But there's a few different scales. And this board is a good choice because you can use as many or as little LEDs as you want. And for the wavegun, you can use whatever colors you want. And like I said, with a bicolor LED or bicolor LEDs, you can have a single LED or single set of LEDs to give you both colors for your ramp and your flash. Save yourself a little bit of space that way. But like I mentioned, that's going to be a little bit more of an advanced wiring setup because of just the way bicolor LEDs work. But not too terribly more difficult. But there will be a special section on that in the instructions with a schematic in case you want to attempt that, feel a little bit more adventurous in terms of your wiring. But like I said, that's the Space Battleship Yamato board. Right now, we're only going to be producing a very small batch of these because we are short on parts. We're trying to get more parts, but it is getting more difficult as time goes on. And we want to see if there's a demand for it. If we're going to make boards, we got to make sure the boards sell. We can't make boards that won't sell because we're not making a whole awful lot of profit off of these things. We're trying to keep the boards cheap for you guys. So we make enough to buy parts, make more boards, and not have an awful lot left over to show for it. So we're going to make a small batch, see how much interest there is. If they all sell out, then we'll make more. As simple as that. So hopefully these boards will be up and available on the HLI shop soon, if not already. That's shop.hobbylinkinternational.com. When the boards are up on the product page, this video should also be posted so you can watch it again if you need to. There should be a link, a download link to a PDF file of the instructions. You can actually read those before you buy the board. You can read those and make a decision based on the instructions whether or not you want to buy the board. So yeah, head over to the HLI shop. The boards are up. Check them out. Consider buying one. Consider putting it into one of your future Space Battleship Yamato builds or whatever other subject you think these effects might be appropriate for. And with that, I'll call an end to this demo. So until the next one, as always, take care, stay safe, and happy modeling. Bye-bye, everybody.